Good evening and welcome to the Kim B. Davis Show. I'm your host, Kim B. Davis, and this evening we have one of our favorite guests. We have Dr. Angela Celeste May. She is our organizational, our clinical, and our forensically trained psychologist. She is also president and co-founder of A.M. and Associates. She is the president and founder of Celeste Productions Incorporated, and she is the immediate past president of the Michigan Psychological Association Foundation Board. After saying all of that, she's also an author, musician. She is currently a trustee of the Michigan Health Council. And this evening, we have a very important topic. We're going to talk about the dark fame of pedophiles and sexual abusers. Good evening and welcome to the show, Dr. Angie. How are you?
I'm doing great. Fantastic. Adjusting my chair. Sorry.
Very good. I know, because I'm going to put you on the hot seat. So I want to start off with R. Kelly, who was a wildly successful, prolific, very creative, wonderful talent. However, there was a dark side to him. Recently, he was sentenced to 30 years in prison for racketeering and sex trafficking. We not only heard about his marriage to R&B former star Aaliyah when she was 14 or 15 years old. We've also heard about him keeping women against their will in particular residences that he owned. And the story, for those that have watched the documentary, you had women who said, you know, he would lock us in a room. We weren't fed, we weren't properly clothed, and we were expected to do all different types of things. And I thought, wow. What I really want you to break down for us, Dr. Angie, why does it seem like, because many people, and I've heard the debates, people have said, oh, R. Kelly is a terrible person. We should never listen to his music. Other people have said, well, his music didn't have anything to do with the abuse. I don't know which is right. And I don't even know if that's really the way to phrase that question. But why is it so difficult for us to look at celebrities, musicians, actors, actresses, politicians, and give them sort of a pass, so to speak, where we sort of ignore it? Because when R. Kelly was really performing and selling records, there were all kinds of rumors and all kinds of things that were said about him, but people were just like, but he makes great music. And it kept going on until it got to a point where people couldn't ignore it anymore. Can you talk about that, Dr. Angie?
Yes. Yeah, you're absolutely right. You said people sort of like practically ignored it. Mm-hmm. People outright ignored it. You know, just exactly like you say, gave it a pass, excused it, all of that. Turned a blind ear, but you know, blind eye and all that. I think there are a couple of things that are going on when that happens. Psychologically. On the one hand, this happens with people, even if they're not famous, even if they're not well known. And we're all familiar with this idea of the first impression. That first impression, it has a powerful effect, and it is a real psychological phenomenon that it's harder to undo or change a first impression. So, you know, however we first got to know R. Kelly, or first got introduced to any other person in our lives or famous person, that it's like it's imprinted on our brain practically, and we hold on to that. So that first impression phenomenon is one thing that's one part of it. It's harder to undo that. And I think some of the things that go on with that first impression, it's like it's more than I like that sound, you know, that music, I like, you know, that image that's presented. It's all of that. And then it's everything that grows up around that. The things that if that first impression is a positive one, And actually it's the same with the negative first impression. Again, it's that idea. It's hard to undo that. It takes more work. It's possible, it happens, but it seems to take more work to undo a negative impression just as it is to take a second look, at a positive first impression. So the whole story, backstory, whatever, that it grows up around that first impression. So we're talking about R. Kelly and others like him. So that first positive impression that we get, everything that's around that is, again, is notice this, I like that. Those lyrics really speak to me. I had such a good time when I remember when I went to his concert. So there's very much a kind of, in our heads, a mental relationship that is formed with that person. So it becomes then more than just that person over there. It's my relationship and how I connect with that person. So now we're talking about not just cognitive, which is, the psychological, the mental connection, but I'm trying to remember if there's a famous phrase, and the phrase, it says that people may not remember
what you said, but
they'll remember how you made them feel.
Yes.
Remember how you made them feel. So then there's the visceral part, there's the emotional connection, there's the memories. All of that is in place by the time you get in these situations, by the time you get secondary information. So by the time people start to your point, it wasn't long after he first came out, as I remember, that there were rumors, right then and there.
Yes.
So it wasn't that long, but the first impression kind of like, beat that information to the punch, like got there first. So you're asking a particular, we don't think of it this way, but we're kind of asking people to unravel and step back from not just the person in the image, but their own personal their connection to them and their emotional investment in that person. So all of that is around that first impression and how we get bonded and, psychologically speaking, invested in the person. There's all of that. Then there's also this thing that has really everything to do with our own egos, our own stuff. And that is not wanting to really acknowledge that maybe we were wrong. Maybe we missed something. Maybe we, now, of course, as we mature and healthy, one would hope being like a healthy, mature person and knowing that we're not perfect is always a good exercise to ask and question and pause for a moment, take a look in the mirror and take a look at the information, research a little deeper, ask more questions. All of those are good, they're good, healthy things because they help inform us. They help give us, information, educate us about the person or the situation. And those are good things to do. But even the most mature person in the world who may do that may still feel a pull like, you want it not to be true. You still kind of want it because of that connection, because I really liked what he, I don't want to have to not like him now, kind of. So there's a lot of investment. That's a word that I keep coming back to. There's a lot of investment and connection with whoever the person is that you had that good first impression with. And there's the kind of that ego part where, I don't want to acknowledge or admit that I might have been right or might have been wrong, I should say, about the person. So there's resistance. There could be resistance to that. So both of those things going on.
And so, it's interesting that you say it the way that you said it, because I just came back from Essence, which is held each year in New Orleans. And Ron Isley of the Isley Brothers and his brother, I think it's only 2 or 3 of them that are remaining, and they performed. And Ron Isley has a hit song with R. Kelly, and that was one of the songs that he performed. They showed the video. What was interesting that in a stadium of 80,000 people, that when that video came on and the song and everyone saw R. Kelly, people screamed, because I think what people thought R. Kelly's coming on the stage. And I'm like, R. Kelly just got sentenced. He's not coming out on the stage. And if he did, ooh, somebody pulled some serious strings. He didn't. And Ron Isley did the song. Mm-hmm. And it's a great song. And I was just like, wow. But what was interesting, because my friends, we were talking about it, and people were saying, I wouldn't have did that song. And I said, yeah, I get it. I said, but for this generation, this is one of those songs that they would know. They did a lot of their classic things that were our music from 30, 40 years ago. But then he also has to do some of the currents, or, you know, as close to as current as possible. But it was interesting because he tried, it looked like, to not show his face, but he couldn't help it because his face is all throughout the video. So it seemed like they tried to edit it and cut it. But as you said, there was such this strong connection with people who love his music. Now, I will tell you, he has a song called I Believe I Can Fly. It's a beautiful song. I love that song. Mm-hmm. However, sometimes when I listen to it, I'm like, ooh, there's a certain pang where I feel like, yeah, I shouldn't be listening to this because he didn't mean any of these words. Yes, he was inspired, and it's hard, and it's almost akin to what happened with Bill Cosby. So here we have this great comedian, this great Black advocate and activist for education and HBCUs and all these things. And then we learn these terrible things about him. And, you know, the problem is there were a lot of people that were shown to be liars. And then there were a lot of people that were shown to be truthful. And so the question, you know, I hear it all the time. Oh, it was conspiracy. They were trying to set up Bill Cosby. They wanted to damage his legacy. I said, well, his legacy has been damaged. Now, I will admit, I never stopped watching the Cosby Show reruns, and I never stopped watching Different World because those are my shows. But when I would watch them, it's like, this is the person that we love. But the person who we saw at trial, and the things that he was accused of were so far removed from who we thought of him as a television character. And we have to remember that this is a character. This is someone that was scripted and written. Yes, he may have had input, but it was created for television. And I would go back to the same thing for R. Kelly. This was a character that was created to sell music. He had that sex appeal. He also had raw talents. He could write, he could sing, he could perform, he could do all these things. And he had charisma. So it makes, and you know, for R. Kelly, what was interesting is that you had women, there were some women who was bailing him out like, I know he's telling the truth, and he didn't even know her. And I thought, wow. Yeah, I don't want that kind of pull from anybody. Nope, I'll just stay right at home. Thank you very much. No, I don't need that.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see that connection as you said it.
Yeah. It's also, you know, on one hand, humans are pretty straightforward. You know, we need water and healthy emotional contact. We need food and sleep. You know, those parts are like pretty straightforward. But on the other hand, we can be kind of complicated too. So both can exist at the same time. Bill Cosby, famously for decades, it was, and you know, is fantastic with kids. And that's what was written into his shows. And he's amazing with kids. He is Dr. Cosby. I mean, he did earn that PhD. Fat Albert was based on his doctorate, you know, dissertation. The philanthropy and all of that. It's possible that he really, really cared about those causes and the work that he did and all of that. And at the same time, because we're flawed, had this real and true issue. That's not a nice thing. It's not a nice thing. And that's something else that we grapple with as humans. you know, we want to use words like monster and make people, you know, either or, you know, there before the grace of God, go, you know, go I. Someone said this, asked this question. It was she's a fellow psychologist actually. And I caught her, I can't remember her name. I caught her, I hadn't seen her before on an interview. And she made a really good point. It's a question that I ask a lot of times when I see R. Kelly's and, you know, different folks. What happened to them? You know, and it's not to perpetuate the stereotype that if you've been what's the word, abused, right, abused or attacked in some way, that you were necessarily going to carry that on. And that's not always the case, but one does wonder about the damage of the perpetrator, you know, as well. So these are people, these are humans doing, they may be doing monstrous things for a variety, you know, who, you know, I haven't done the psychological evaluation because I can't say, you know, what all the reasons are, but there are a lot of things that can be very seductive, we know. And it's like when people talk about, you know, the whole addictive culture that goes hand in hand with a lot of folks in the entertainment industry with the child actors and music and, you know, all the rest. And one thing people don't realize is, you know, yes, it's all around them. That's true. And yes, you can say no for sure. Absolutely. But I think sometimes people who are not in those industries don't really see, and this is not to excuse anything at all, but just to set the context of the environment. It's like, you know, if you go to a restaurant and they put a little container of nuts out in front of you, you know, some chips and we're talking, you know, a bowl of cocaine and a bowl of this, and then they keep pushing it at you and keep pushing it at you.
Eventually, you know, you're gonna take some.
Exactly. Well, I wouldn't say you're gonna, but I would say it's mighty hard to resist. Like, you know,
unless you get up from the table. Unless you get up from the table.
Yes, absolutely. And then when you get up from the table and go to the next party, doing the same thing. So yeah, like you say, eventually it can't. After a while, it can. You gotta have some extra there to stay away from that. So. And by the same token, about how both of these, you know, two things can exist at the same time. With the Cosby situation, I do believe I have heard that, like you said, this targeting of him, and this is with both of them, the targeting of him as a Black man. Then there's that other layer. And I think you used the term, you talked about, you did, like Cosby, you know, this is family. So that connection, that connectedness, when it's a Black person and a Black man, then we have that additional layer of wanting to defend our own, particularly Black men, because of, you know, how much they've been attacked and called monsters when they weren't. So there's that additional, again, the emotional tug of it, you know, the protectiveness, not wanting, and we don't want it. We're hoping it's, you know, I hope that's not true. We were hoping it's not. But I would say, I can't say for certain, you know, I'm not on the investigative team or anything like that, but I think we can say, just knowing how things go and knowing how stuff happens. It's not that strange to imagine that, you know, perhaps whomever the powers that be within the industry or around the industry may have found him threatening, may have found him very threatening because of the amount of power that he accumulated, again, as a Black man. All of that can be existing at the same time. He, you know, perhaps he was targeted, but that still doesn't mean he didn't make choices. And I believe I have heard that the things that he had been accused of with this repeated, like, setup of, you know, getting her alone, giving her a drug, that kind of thing, that goes on, you know, which is awful. It's awful, and it's completely unacceptable. It goes on, but shouldn't happen. But if a Black man is doing that and you're already feeling threatened about the amount of power that he has accumulated, should he be doing that? Absolutely not. He should be accused and held to account and all the rest. But the targeting part, May come in with highlighting him when he's one of how many who are doing that. They all should stop doing that. So, so that there's all of that. There can be the racism part in there. That still doesn't mean he's not culpable. It still doesn't mean he's not a philanthropist who's given a lot. It still doesn't mean he's not fantastic with kids and champions education. But the part that's damaging people, damaging women, and damaging himself, that needs to be, that needs to stop, and that needs to be, punished in the way it needs to be punished, definitely for what he did. So yeah, so then there's the he's one of our own, that's a big part of it, I think, too, for the Black community, for both of them and others, and others also. Yeah.
And I really think you're correct. And I want to switch gears a little bit and bring up a topic that's fascinating to me. So back in the 90s, we had Notorious B.I.G. He was a very famous rapper along with Tupac. They had this rumored feud and all these things. But what was interesting about Notorious B.I.G. or Biggie, as people call him, Biggie Smalls, is that Biggie, he was this big personality, but he was this chubby, chunky guy. And it was funny because there were all these women fighting over him. And I remember thinking, he's not attractive. I don't understand. But you had women who were like, I love him. That's my man. And all these women were fighting over him. And when they did the documentary and they were talking about Little Kim, who was one of the pioneering women rappers, and you had Faith Evans, who at the time was like becoming the princess, I think, of R&B, and literally two different types of women. And when I say two different types, one was R&B, one was really hip hop. But Little Kim was doing something different that hadn't been done by some of the earlier women rappers. And MC Lyte would be what you would consider your woman pioneer in hip hop. But Little Kim took it to a different place. She was raunchy. She was saying things that men said. And so she was just out there in your face, where Faith Evans was still talking about, oh, I love you, I'm going to be your wife, and everything's going to be great, and we're going to live in this magic place. And not only was he messing around with both of them, but he was messing around with women everywhere he went. Why is it, Dr. Angie, because I've asked this question to different women, why is it that men can seem to play the field really well, yet when women try and do that, they're called different types of names, they're shunned, and we don't call men out for their traumatizing behavior? And I was talking to a girlfriend of mine, and she said, Kim, behind every crazy woman is a man that traumatized her. I said, oh, that's a talking point. And so I using your expertise, Dr. Angie, Little Kim, it seems like she went through some things because of Biggie. And it seems like Faith Evans went through some things. Can you talk about when men abuse women in these relationships under the guise of playing the field? Yes. I know I gave you a lot.
It's good stuff. Okay, so I think a good place to start is expectations. I've had conversations with, I remember a conversation in particular, it was many years ago, with a young lady who was, I was getting my hair flat ironed at the time. I was getting flat ironed. And I remember she one day she was talking, she was going on about, and I've had these conversations with other folks too, but I remember this one in particular. I apologize for my phone that I thought I'd turned down. Anyway, she was talking about women, and she was making a blanket statement about women. And she was saying that, the stereotypes, women are catty, and they're just, you can't trust them, and they're so petty and blah, blah, blah. And I was listening to her, and I'm always wonder, like, step in there and champion. That's not true. Oh, and I list all these women in my life that have been wonderful, blah, blah, blah. But this particular time, what I said was, you're talking specifically about women in your industry, aren't you? And she's like, oh, yeah, I guess that's true. Now, it doesn't, so my point being, not to invalidate your, her, like to her, your experience, but be careful that you don't assume that that's every woman everywhere. Sometimes you see it more in certain age groups if it's a maturity issue, and that's not every young person, of course, but you may see some of this cattiness in certain types of work, lines of work, certain types of lifestyle that's being led, all of that. That's not every woman. So getting back to this idea of expectations, we have these stereotypes and expectations of each other, whether it's based on race, whatever the case. So in these relationships, some, not all, there are some women, just like there are some men, who have an expectation of what they think a man does, whether it's because from their background, what they've been told, what they've seen, what's been modeled for them when they were growing up or whatever, what a man does, what you can expect from a man, what constitutes being a quote unquote real man, what looks like strength, all of that. So that's there's not just one answer, I think, for all, the various women who and other men and women who might defend a man who plays the field. And playing the field is one thing, but just straight up disrespect, abuse, trading them like business, like cards. To me, that's like a little more than playing the field. But that kind of behavior, it takes two to tango. So it's and maybe his behavior, which is disrespectful, and then it's also because there are two people and at least two people involved. It's her acceptance of it. And then when I say acceptance now, I don't mean someone in an abusive relationship who perhaps feels she can't get out, right now or whatever the case. But the acceptance of it in terms of not I'm afraid to leave or whatever, but rather, well, this is what men do. And as long, we hear this sometimes from women, some women, well, he's paying the bills or he's giving me this fur coat or he's whatever. So now, expectations. And one thing I want to say about that, when I was saying disrespect, I don't just mean his disrespect of her. He's disrespecting himself as well. So these messages we give our kids, these messages we give folks when they're growing up, that does a disservice to girls who become women, but it also does a disservice to men. And again, I have to say, particularly Black men, the messages that you are, the most that you are is this oversexed, exaggerated cartoon version of what strength is supposed to look like. Excuse me. So there's a lot of damage, that's tied to that, of course, obviously. But expectations, messages that are given, that's a part of that, defending him and fighting over him. And then there's also this universal, regardless of your background, this universal idea and seductive nature of what looks like power, money, and influence and access. So this feeling that I'm with him, he looks like, he's really climbing the ladder and he's, making all the money and getting into all the major parties and stuff. So for some, it may not be him so much, but what he represents, and he's my ticket. See, he's my door to get over there. I can put up with some blah, blah, blah. I can put up with that. Can be a part of that for a lot of folks. And then self-esteem is weaved throughout all of that. Self-esteem is weaved throughout all of that, because there are also a lot of women whom I know of, read about, or who the flip side is, I noticed that he started that behavior and I was gone, because I'd rather be alone and happy with cats than myself as I don't feel I feel I deserve better than that. So yeah, I would say depending on the person, it could be some combination of all of those, some of those, all of those, but all of them we see so pervasively in society, and magnified sometimes in not all, but parts of our culture. It's like compensating for a person, meaning Black men, compensating for a person for whom their rights to exist and be a man in this society are forever being threatened and stripped, or attempts to be stripped away. So that's another part of that too. Again, going back to that earlier conversation about protecting our own. I don't want to tear him down. And so not wanting to tear him down, some people interpret that as looking like, therefore, I'm not going to say anything or call him on the carpet about things that he needs to be called on the carpet for.
Right.
Because he already is having, and I've heard this, I'm sure you have as well, or some iteration of, well, he's already facing so many challenges, so I don't want to be another challenge. So, and again, it just does a disservice to lowering the bar and our expectations for our, ourselves and men and Black men. Yeah.
And that's a great point. And I want to add this too, because I don't want people to think that this is just a problem in the Black community, because this is one of the things that we talked about with Donald Trump. Donald Trump had been married 3 times. His first wife, Ivanka, he had married her and then left her for Marla Maples. They notoriously had an affair, left her, claimed that he was in love. Next thing you know, now he's left Marla Maples and now he's with Melania. So he was married 3 times with children from all 3 marriages. And people were just like, well, we're going to overlook that. And I thought, okay, but wait a minute now, because if he were of a different hue, you would say, see, he doesn't have family values. And so a lot of times it's hypocritical when we see it in other communities, no matter the monetary status, the class level, whatever it is, people will make excuses for it. So I find that interesting.
Yeah, I'm glad you made that point too, because you're right. The behavior, the abuse of power, all of those things, they know no racial or ethnic cultural boundaries.
Not at all.
None at all. None at all. I'm so glad you said that. That's true. It's a human temptation.
It is.
It is a human temptation.
Okay, so we started off with R. Kelly. I have to go back to him because I have to talk about Aaliyah and R. Kelly. So I was a huge fan of Aaliyah, and I have to admit, Dr. Angie, I didn't have a clue. I was paying attention to her, but I wasn't paying attention to her like that. And so, when her documentary came out and they were talking about how they were married and they were wearing matching outfits, I had to go back. I said, I remember seeing that, but I didn't think anything of it because you didn't want to think anything of it. Right. And so, R. Kelly at a certain point was the poster child for getting away with different things and getting stories swept up under the rug. And, there was the whole notion of somebody forged her birth certificate. She could have been pregnant. She had an abortion. He was supposedly having an affair with her mother. It was just all these different things. And I know you said earlier that it's about the connection and how these people make us feel. But Dr. Angie, is there something in American culture? Because I often wonder, is this simply an American thing? Because everywhere else in the world, we have royalty. And so people don't look at us. Okay, so you shaking your head.
No, it's not just American.
Okay, so explain.
Okay. Well, there's another huge component here. There's another huge component we've got to talk about. And that is, what's a good way to put it? The disregard for the value of girls and women. That's yes. And that is not just America. That is not, so many countries around the world we see it. We do tend to see it in societies and countries and cultures that are lean more patriarchal, more, male run as compared to matriarchal. But that's a big part of it. So you can see, because we are talking about our own country of America, but anywhere you can see you can see how much girls/women are valued by the, how much attention or they're given when there's even a hint, or like you said, those rumors that were coming out, or how much they were ignored, or the tendency is to race to prop up and support the person with whom you feel that you have a connection. First of all, that's the first thing. And then secondarily, or I don't know which is first, because they're both can be so ingrained in, in societies, different ones. If you're talking about a girl, a teenager, this is a female child, the devaluing of girls and women is a big part of that. And we see that played out in, that what is the whole Lolita syndrome and that movie and that imagery of the young girl that, seduces the adult man. We see it in re-victimizing rape victims. And, were you asking for it? As if
what were you wearing?
Yeah, exactly. I was about to say, item of clothing or the lack thereof, or whatever the case. It's not to say that, people are wired certain ways. Some things are tempting. They are tempting. We're talking about humanity, but being tempted and what you do with it and how you deal with it, how fast you run from it, or whatever the case, are, those are kind of like two different things. So, that's a huge part of that's by no means just, just an American thing. But I'm thinking about some of these child actors. I'm thinking about in the acting industry. Some of the child actors, at least in American cinema, it's not just here, but when we hear later, after the kids have grown up, and we hear about some of these boys, different backgrounds, whether they're white or whatever the case, who were abused and molested and everything as child actors. Just, I don't want to use a term like passed around. I don't want to say that. They're, just.
But essentially, that is it.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are multiple isms that are the problem. There's the sexism that's the problem. There's devaluing children. There's the whole power dynamic. Whoever has the power seems to be able to, wield that, and society, in a broader sense, we all have culpability and or a responsibility to stand up and ask some questions when we, hear some of that, and not just sweep it under the rug because we like the way they make us feel. We like that music. We like that movie or whatever, so it's something that I think that we all have to continue to work on with growth individually and as a society. I am appreciating that in our country right now, we are seeing for the last few years of the Me Too movement and some of those, we are seeing not just a reckoning, but more of the citizenry as a whole, all of us kind of taking that responsibility more seriously and paying better attention to the voices of people, regardless of their age, when they say that they've been abused. Yeah.
Those are really good points. And I would add, in America, especially with music, there seems to be this fetish, I'm going to say this wrong, fetishization, where we've turned women into a fetish, meaning a thing, something just to ogle at, where we have what we call video vixens. Every video, when videos first started coming out in the 80s and 90s, you had to have some naked woman. And not that she was completely naked, but she was scantily dressed. And she, you know, in rock music, she was on top of a car and she had on a short skirt and, you know, some short top that showed her, was showing the curve of her breast, and she was swinging her hair everywhere. When you got to hip hop, you had women in very short shorts and, you know, scantily clad tops that again showed the curve of her breasts. And women have talked about, you know, you go to be a video girl dancer, hoping that someone will discover you so that either you can go further in dance and do what you want to do, or go into acting, or whatever it is. And most of them were like, I was just relegated to whatever amount of time on screen, and I was just a pretty face. And when you hear that, you're like, oh, so you've got this one guy sitting up here saying all these different things, and you just got a bunch of scantily clad women behind him dancing. And dressing, so then
window dressing.
Right, window dressing, exactly. Almost like it's a store, and this is a storefront window, and here's your performer, and this is the decoration around him. So this is what we need you to see. So then when men come out in the world and they see women dressed, even if a woman just decides, I'm going to go to a nightclub and I just want to wear a short dress because I like how this dress looks. Well, if you think that all women want to be catcalled like they do in the videos, and then you catcall her and she doesn't respond the way that you want her to, or she says something back to you, or she's offended, or she's angry, then all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, wait a minute. This didn't go the way that I thought. And it's interesting because I had an experience several years ago. I was doing some work with a particular political figure, and we had to go to his church for a Sunday service, and for him to get up and talk in front of people and ask for their vote for him. And there was a whole conversation of, Kim, you have to wear a dress. I went, okay, that's really not that big of an issue. Yeah, I like to wear pants because we're working. So I was like, I will wear a dress. And then a conversation from one of the ladies that was there, Kim, don't wear anything super short. I was like, I go to church. I don't wear anything super, super short. But but the thing of it was, this particular congregation was so conservative, Dr. Angie. I wore a skirt suit, fully buttoned up blouse. But when I sat down, as all women do, your skirt comes up just a little bit. Well, all of a sudden I felt uncomfortable because I was in the front. Someone brought me a blanket for my lap.
I thought you were going to say that your knees showed, or like a little knee.
It was. My knees showed. That's all it was. You know, the skirt just went up above my knee. And I sort of felt uncomfortable because all the other women around me, that the skirt was either below their knee or they had one of these little lap blankets. And this particular woman, she said, Kim, I brought one for you because I knew you would need it. And I was just like, this is different. I've never experienced. But, you know, it was that whole thing of, you can't entice the minister or the, the men that are upfront. And I thought, but I'm very married, very happy, have children. I'm not trying to entice anybody, but it was just one of those things. And so it's interesting, like you said, how when a woman is attacked, what were you wearing? Why were you there? What were you doing? What was your expectation? My expectation was that I was going to go to the bar because I've had a really hard day and I wanted to have a couple of drinks. And yes, I put on a short dress, but I wanted to make it home. I did not. I was attacked because, some guy said whatever. And now all of a sudden I feel guilty. Like I caused this, instead of it being, why didn't the man just leave me alone?
Right. And when you tie it to the imagery, going back to the music industry, when you tie it to the imagery of what's shown and the role of what women are supposed to be. I love your analogy of like it's a store, and you just kind of like grab which one you want, like a candy store,
Yes.
They're not people, with brains and all the rest. They're just, they're there for you to what you want and when you want and there, like you said, it's very dehumanizing. And I always when I hear those kinds of stories, I always think about how much ability and strength and what's the word, like ability to hold oneself back that a would-be perpetrator has if he has a shotgun on. Now, I'm not advocating shotgun, but it's a great example of the amount of control. That's the word I was looking for. The self-control that one really can muster when one has a different set of expectations, such as I might get hurt if I don't respect this woman, no matter what she's wearing or not wearing. So Troy, there, other than maybe some small minority of people who perhaps have some psychological issue going on where they perhaps really are not able to have some self-control. For the most part, I think there's a lot more self-control available than some might want to acknowledge and admit, as that we can see manifested when the situation changes and perhaps they are in danger. So yeah, that blaming the victim, all of that. And that's just like saying that a prostitute can't be raped or a wife can't be, it's just, it's ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous. But those images and those ideas that are perpetuated. When you were talking about the music industry, I was thinking about even going back, since the dawn of time. I mean, if you're selling a car in the 1950s or 60s, why is there a woman draped on the hood?
Yes.
Does she come with the car? I mean,
right.
Women have been used to sell stuff, forever, for as long as we can, as long as we can remember. There was and I'm thinking about this other interview that I saw. I think it was, okay, we love Soul Train, right?
Yes.
We love Soul Train. Grew up watching Soul Train, run, on Saturdays to come and watch on TV. And they have a little different series where they interview Soul Train dancers from years ago, like what are they doing today in their lives, and they'll tell their story of how they got chosen to be on. And I think it might have been one of those stories, but this was a lady who was a really talented dancer. She was a strong dancer. And I think she stands on Soul Train, but she was talking about how in the, like you said, in the 80s and the 90s and the video, when videos really started exploding, how it was so cool for, dancers. They were really, as we remember, they're getting a lot of work and stuff. And she in particular was talking about, for herself, she became very, very successful. Okay. And worked with a lot of like major stars, including Michael Jackson and different others. And she was talking about how she was there. She saw when the music industry, the American-driven music industry, really began to change. Because she, if you remember, because you were referencing the 90s, you remember how, even though yes, there are always this like somewhat scantily clad rock music and different ones, but remember the 90s, especially early hip hop and even R&B, where you would see young ladies in like the baggy jeans, and the focus was really on their technique, like they could dance, and it was like the guys and the women and stuff. Yes, she was talking about how she remembered when the industry, and particularly hip hop, and R&B started to change in terms of the visuals and she was saying that was when she started to step away from it, because she was like, okay, now it's about less clothes, and she's like, I've got the same technique. What are we doing? What are we doing here? So bringing it back around again to R. Kelly or Bill Cosby or any Biggie, any of these folks. I talk about this human temptation. Trump notoriously wiggles out of just every kind of accusations. So outside of his wives, just so many credible accusations from various women, and other folks. This idea of if you have a certain amount of power and money and influence, you have greater opportunity. It seems to not just treat women a certain way, but I hate to say get away with it, but have more people support you in that. If that makes any sense. And that's not just, even though we're talking about people on the public stage, that's just even, in your neighborhood or wherever. If there's an attorney or someone who's very well respected, it becomes hard, in his community or whatever. It can, or her community, it's really hard, can be hard for people to know that person, know their reputation. They've known them for years, they've been to fundraisers together, to want to accept that she's abusing her husband, or that, or whatever the case. We just, it's the same idea. We just kind of don't want to, we don't, the human brain, generally speaking, not everyone, but oftentimes you just kind of like, first reaction is that it's hard to accept that. It's hard to accept that because you feel like you know them. And no one wants to feel like that they've had the wool pulled over their eyes. No one wants to feel like that they've been fooled. And also I think too, people can feel a sense of guilt, like, oh my goodness, why didn't I see that? Or did I let that go on all this time? I had, why didn't I see the signs? And so, again, it seems to rarely be just about the other person. It's, my tie, whether it's, I feel guilty and therefore I'm scared that maybe I could have done something, or I don't want to acknowledge that I missed something, whatever the case, that there is that, there is that tie. So yeah. And the idea, again, the power and influence, you don't have to be the most wealthy person in the whole wide world, but even within your own circle, the idea of power and influence, that's a big part of it too, as far as what people are allowed to get away with and held to account or not held to account for their behavior. And that's across the board, whether we're talking about, abuse or whatever the case. But, yeah, all of that, sets of expectations, who we value, how we define ourselves and our image, all of that, all that's tied to that. Yeah.
You bring up a lot of good points, especially about power and influence. Harvey Weinstein, famous Hollywood producer, for years was abusing Hollywood starlets. And when they started to come out of the woodwork to say, he assaulted me, he did this, or he did that. And two stories that stuck out to me. One, Gwyneth Paltrow. She is an Oscar-winning Hollywood starlet who comes from a Hollywood family. Her mother is an actress. Her father was a director. And her story was, he tried, she got away from him. And then the actor Brad Pitt, who at the time she was dating, went and threatened him and said, ever touch her again, me and you gonna have a problem. And I was like, oh, I love Brad Pitt even more. But then the second one was Lupita Nyong'o. And she said, which goes back to your point of where people start to feel guilty, like, why didn't I see it? She said, well, I was invited to his house. There was a screening. Yeah, it was just me and him. But then it started to feel weird. He left and he never came back. And I took off because I had a bad feeling. And oftentimes I've interviewed lots of child abuse survivors. And so one particular young lady always stands out to me because, well, there are a few, but this one, she says, her relative had molested her. She didn't tell her mother about it. She didn't think that anybody would believe her. And it wasn't until she had her own children and ended up in a family reunion or a family gathering space, and this relative showed up, that she felt like she was that child again. She had never addressed it. And so then she began to tell the story, because she actually decided to write a book about it, because she said, I have to purge these feelings. And she said all the things that you just said. I felt dirty. I felt like it was my fault. This was a family member. I didn't want to hurt my mother because this was somebody that she was really close to, that she cared about. And it goes back to one of my favorite books, which is The Color Purple. And in The Color Purple, they always, one of the famous lines is, a girl child is not safe in a family of men. And at some point in society, and you talked about this earlier, about this being a patriarchal society and girls not being valued, many times, especially when I talk to girl survivors, they're always, it was my uncle. My mother knew about it, or she ignored it. And when I tried to say something, everybody said I was lying. There was another woman who her family ostracized her because they said, you're lying, you're making up stories, you just want attention. Why would a child make up stories so horrific? Now, I know that it does happen. I do know that it happened. We've all read different cases. But my question is, Dr. Angie, so much is known, you know, from the Harvey Weinsteins to all these different stories. Like I just said, we have the book The Color Purple, and it's a wonderful book, but it's hard to read because there is so much sexual abuse in that book. But you have so much that people know, yet R. Kelly was still able to abuse Aaliyah, basically in front of the public eye. We still have cases where families, you know, things happen in a family. It's a cousin, it's a mama, it's an uncle, it's somebody. And people still want to push it under the rug. Why are we still hiding abuse and not calling it for what it is?
Oh gosh. Yeah, that's a question that needs to continue to be asked. We need to keep asking that question. You gave a major part of the answer when you were talking about families that will, you know, for all intents and purposes, turn on the victimized child or ostracize them, like you were saying. It's for families, a lot of times it never feels like it's about the child or the one perpetrator and the one victim. It feels like you are, you know, to the child, you are accusing all of us. You are telling all of us in your family that we failed. For example, if you have that uncle, like you said, or aunt, you know, women who abuse, men who abuse, if you have that aunt or cousin, whomever it is, they came out of somebody's home. They were raised by somebody. Somebody was responsible for them growing up. So what a lot of times with people, their visceral automatic reaction is, what are you saying about our people? What are you saying about my, you know, my family? What are you saying about my child? You know, if, you know, the mother of that cousin, you know, who may be accused of the molestation. Well, what are you trying to say about my child? Which is really also, what are you saying about me? You're trying to say I'm a bad mother, that I would raise a child who would do that. So that what feels like an accusation, it feels like an accusation to all of us or to our own. You're attacking ours. And one human tendency is to, you know, circle even tighter when we feel that, and this for any culture, when we feel that a person is being attacked, we all circle in that much harder to protect our own. Now, we would hope that doing so looks like you're circling around the victim. And there are lots of families in which that is the case. But, you know, to your question, why do we continue to sweep it under the rug? Because it is horrific, like you said. Dealing with anything horrific is not comfortable. No matter what it is, it's not comfortable. It takes a certain level of maturity and growth to be able to face something, no matter what it is, that's uncomfortable. So that needs to be in place. And it's not always that neat and tidy. You know, the stuff is sloppy, it's messy, you know. But also when I say mature, you know, it doesn't mean you're perfect. You may stumble and bumble. We all make mistakes. But do you keep coming back and trying to get answers, or do you at least try to get, you know, some clarity or some clarification or get some information about it? Or do you run and hide from it? So when we're talking about, when you're asking the question about why do people continue to sweep this under the rug, a lot of times I would say if we like step back a little bit and look at how they handle stuff, and generally speaking, in that particular family. It doesn't have to always be a pattern, but sometimes it is. Is this a family that tends to try not to deal with the difficult things, no matter what they are? Is this a family that tries not to look at the painful things, no matter what they are? Or are they a family that sits down and says, okay, we already have a pattern in place where we do a family meeting, or we address this one-on-one, or whatever it is. So if that's not already, if they're already folks who tend not to deal with the hard truths, the hard realities, and this is one of the most difficult things that a family deals with, it's going to be even harder for them to deal, with this. But definitely the feeling that you're not just accusing the one, you're accusing us all. That's part of it. And then that also goes hand in hand with being terrified. It's like any family secret. Now everyone will know.
Mm.
So now we're talking about going beyond the boundaries of just the family. And what does that mean? It means we'll all be embarrassed in front of everyone. We'll all, and there's different things for different people, but some of the general underlying feelings and thoughts are, we'll all be exposed as something's wrong with our family. We'll all be shunned, and it's not all in their heads. Sometimes people in society will react that way. Oh, that's that family I heard where the uncle did blah, blah, blah. Don't go over there. Don't deal with them. Even if maybe the rest of the family supports the child. So they're not, there's fallout. It's messy. There are consequences. There are risks, that child that says that's hugely terrifying for that child to tell on that person, as we can only imagine. And it is a huge risk, but not just to that child. It's also a huge risk to the family, because now what are you going to do? You're going to call the authorities. Other people will know. Who else is going to find out? Is my class going to find? So that fear is something that we hope and want to train our adults to deal with in a way that causes the least amount of additional trauma for the child and helps the family get the help that they need. But unfortunately, we know too often families, or oftentimes, not all, but of course, oftentimes, or many times, I'll put it that way, there are families that are not prepared to deal with that. So what do they do instead? Blaming the child is a way to get away from that and not look at it. And the last thing I'll say about that too is, there are some people for whom they really are not in a place to wrap their mind around it. Like it's not always, I don't want to make it sound like it's always like a ploy to protect our own. A lot of times there are adults who they really just can't believe it. And that goes right back to the R. Kellys and you just can't see it. You just can't believe it. You've got, the feeling is, I've got to figure out why my child would come up with this, because this can't be. I just have a hard time accepting that for all the reasons I mentioned and others. So it's a difficult thing. It's an important question that you ask, and we need to keep asking it. But I definitely appreciate the time in which we're living now, where we are having these conversations out in public, in the media, in print. Like you said, the books, The Color Purple, the movies are showing that this does happen in all kinds of families, and that we need to get past the fear so that we can be about the business of working to stop it from happening, working to minimize the damage to the victims as much as we can, and working to help. It's a mental health issue as well as a physiological and emotional and everything else issue too. So yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. That's a great way to end our show. So Dr. Angie, before we leave, tell us how we can find you, give us all your social media links, and tell us everything that's going on with you, because I know it's a lot.
Thank you. Thank you for asking. Well, everyone can find me. I'm on all of the social media, well, most of the social media platforms, not on TikTok at this moment anyway, or Snapchat actually, but I am on YouTube. My YouTube channel is pretty much my name. And as you can see, Angela Celeste May. That's on YouTube, which deals more with the music side of what I do. I do vocal quick tips and stuff about genres and helping people understand the differences with genres and music related content. So that's on my YouTube channel. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram as well, and on LinkedIn. I have a couple of Facebook pages. One is my regular one, Angela Celeste May, regular, my personal page. And then there's Dr. Angela Celeste May, and that's my music Facebook. In the company that I have with my sister, A.M. May and Associates Incorporated. We are on Facebook and Instagram as well, at Angela Celeste May, A.M. May Associates. We do counseling, consulting, and coaching virtually. We're working virtually, so we're able to work with people from around the world. The coaching that we do is personal coaching, professional coaching, creative coaching, and doctoral coaching. I do doctoral coaching. My sister does a lot of creative coaching. Mm-hmm. We have a women's group, a women's power group that meets in the fall and then again in the spring. So it's a eight-week group, power group for women, and we meet virtually and we help women who are entrepreneurs or whatever they're doing in their work lives. We help to elevate their work and their businesses to the next level, help them to continue growing. So we'll be starting our next cohort in the fall in October. Start looking for advertising for that and marketing for that in September. On all of the socials just that I mentioned, you'll see the marketing, and also you can go to our website, amaassociates.com. For myself, I also have a men's stress management coaching group for Black men that I will be offering in the fall again as well. So this will be my second incarnation, so I'm excited about doing that. So again, look at all those socials for marketing for that coming up in the fall, probably in end of September or so. And then what else? Oh, my sister also offers a yearly retreat at the beginning of the year. So she does that particularly for creative professionals as well. So those are the three main things that we have ongoing. In addition to the counseling that my sister offers, I do have, you can see the cover of my book here, which is Freedom. Freedom, what is the experience of living without negative self-imposed limitations? So I'm all about not limiting ourselves and realizing that we don't have to be confined in terms of our growth and realizing our full potential. My book, Freedom, you can find it on Amazon, barnesandnoble.com. Just you can type in Dr. Angela Celeste May, Freedom, what is the experience, however, and it'll pop up at other locations as well. I published it through Ex Libris, so you can find it on their site as well. But yeah, it was a wonderful research project that I very much enjoyed, and 7 main themes came out of this research with people from different backgrounds, all dealing with ways in which they were limited or limiting themselves in some way through their process to becoming free from that. And the themes that came out of the research is very universal and applicable to all kinds of situations. So pick up your copy. I'll be doing more with this book as well. I've done book signings. I was at the Chicago State University a few years ago. I created a whole 5-6 week workshop course around this at Oakland Community College here in Southeast Michigan. So I've been able to do a lot of things with the book, and I'll be doing more in the future. Excellent. Thank you for asking. For my music side of what I do, yeah, that's a lot of what I do. For the music side, I'm always thinking of what else. Music side, Celeste Productions is my production company, and I produce albums and music videos, which you can see on my YouTube channel as well, and I teach through that. I'm writing new music right now. I've got about 5 new songs. So I'm working towards recording my 3rd album over the next few months, and I am teaching, so you can always go to my reverbnation.com/Angela Celeste May for information about that. You can go to Dr. Angela May on my Angela Celeste May on my Facebook page for information about that. So I teach in person and virtually voice and piano. And my studio also offers drum lessons through my brother and other wonderful things here at Michigan, Marygrove Conservancy in Southeast Michigan. Yeah, so I've done a little bit of singing lately. I just sang recently for a showcase. I'm going to do another one at Wayne County Community College District coming up in August. So I'm starting. I have done a lot of done some music stuff, but the performing side. So I'm excited to get back out there. I've been asked to do some more singing, so I'm going to be doing more. Leading up to the release of the last album. So that's it.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Angie, for being on the Kim B. Davis Show. I know that next month you will bring us another fantastic topic that we can discuss. So thank you again for being on.
Absolutely.
Thank you guys for tuning in to the Kim B. Davis Show. You know, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, LinkedIn, everywhere on social media. And it's Kimberly Bachelor. It's spelled BATCHELOR. Davis. You can see this show at youtube.com/Kimberly Bachelor Davis. You can hear this show at Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, and Wisdom. And you can learn more about me as an author at kimbdavis.com. Thank you again for tuning in. I hope you'll join us on our next show. And as always, remember, be magnificent.